Professor Paul Wainaina, the Vice Chancellor of Kenyatta University, and as it were, a friend. Professor Frederick Gravnil, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation and Outreach, Kenyatta University, whom I've interacted with a couple of times, and has been an inspiration as well to me. Mrs. Bate, the Director for Regional Office for DAD, nice to meet you today. And I think you've introduced me to how I need to think about the relationship with the German government. Professor Bayer, the Vice President for Internationalization and Transfer, nice to meet you, and I'm very impressed with the progress that is going on. And I think we are picking the challenge from Professor Wainaina about the next steps, right? Dr. Kosimbe, a great friend as well. We've worked for a number of years together on different things, and I can see things coming to fruition, and it's quite encouraging as well. The governance team of Chandaria Business Innovation and Incubation Centers, partners, mentors, founders, the judges in the room, staff, students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's really a challenge, and I feel the pressure and of course the excitement of being invited here as a chief guest. You know, I have a little bit of a background in academia. I taught for some time, and so when I get to such kind of environment, I feel at home. Now, I was invited by the Vice Chancellor, and I gladly accepted because the efforts here simply speak to what Kenya is trying to promote across the country. So I don't hesitate on such a request. I simply respond and say, we can reorganize other things, but I will be there. For Kenya, I will tell you a little bit about it, but before I do, I want to make a confession that since I got to office, which is some months back, Kenyatta University has been probably the one I have been most affiliated to. I have visited here twice in a formal capacity at the university. I engaged with university leadership. I have been there informally through the invitation of the Incubation Center with Dr. Kosimbe. I have engaged with startups. I've walked around and gotten a sense of what's been going on, some of the work that KeNIA has funded in the past, and as well as the National Research Fund. I have been on KU TV, and I confirm that it is doing well. And the students there told me we are on our way competing with the big players in the market. I've participated in some online events of Kenyatta University, and now here we are on a physical conference. It's not a coincidence that I have had these affiliations with the university. I think it's just a reflection of the university leadership championing the narrative of innovation, which we expected to promote at the country level. And is, as it were, you know, Vice Chancellor, if you succeed, I succeed. If you don't succeed, I don't succeed. And so it is in my interest to follow through and provide the support that I can to institutions and individuals who are trying to promote this agenda, and that we will work together, because as an institution whose mandate is to develop and manage the innovation system, it's a system. It means several components in that system. They also need to work together in some way. So I commend you, Professor Wainaina, and the leadership team for the efforts and the leadership that has gone into it. Let me tell you a little bit about Kenya National Innovation Agency. So the agency was established by an Act of Parliament of 2013. For some years, the operationalization of it took some time, and there has been an acting CEO. So I took office late last year. It is young, with a huge mandate of developing and managing the national innovation system. And we are measured by how many ideas we take to market. And that speaks very closely to what the Vice Chancellor is saying, that beyond the prototypes, do we find it in market? And this is something that we are all trying to figure out and thinking through what are the elements that are weakening that process, and how do we strengthen them. For Kenya, we're looking at it in 3 levels in terms of the efforts. And as I've spent some months to think through and engage as many stakeholders as possible. And these 3 levels are, first is to try and establish an appropriate environment. And that starts with policy environment, regulatory environment, issues of technology transfer and commercialization, and the practices of the same, ensuring that we think through what is the national priorities and what is the national obligation. What is the responsibility from a legal perspective? What would be the institutional obligation? If I say Kenyatta University, so what is the obligation of the university in the context of creating an appropriate environment? And what is the responsibility of the individual, the one who is innovating, the one who is facilitating, and so forth? And then within that element of establishing appropriate environment, we're working on appropriate policies at national level and institutional level that then make it appropriate within the university or a research center and so forth. We think through sensitization and for people to appreciate issues of intellectual property, their protection, their exploitation, and taking care of interests of the stakeholders. The setting up of incubation hubs and innovation spaces through whatever means across the country, and technology transfer offices as well. That's appropriate environment, layer one. Then we move into another layer where we're trying to think about the scaling of innovations. In practice, I need to find a way of that person who is working in that appropriate environment and help that person to scale. That means I have to scout. We have to find the guys. 2, we've got to recognize. 3, we've got to provide structured support. That could be funding, that could be coaching, that could be mentorship, that could be linkages to investors. And I think that's the element that Professor is also talking about, and the kind of appropriate partners. Some hand-holding needs to happen there. We can't do it as KeNIA, by ourselves, but making sure that Chandaria has that kind of capacity. And even if we build the funding mechanisms and channeled it either as an agency or through partners, but as long as the home, which is the environment in which Chandaria is operating and the innovator is operating, is able to get things to scale. Thirdly is to try and strengthen the interaction of the key players of that innovation system, because the silo mindset sometimes catches up with us. And in the pride of that which we do in our own territories, sometimes limits the bigger scheme of things. Sometimes, Vice Chancellor, some of these things also even start in the way we run our institutions. If I go to a School of Medicine and I ask them about their interaction with the School of Arts and Design, probably I don't get a lot. If I ask the School of Engineering, who are creating prototypes, and the School of Communication and Journalism, and say, well, once you've created the prototype, how do you ensure that it's well communicated? Do they understand that they have to design with that in mind? Probably is not going to be as strong. And so this silo mentality is natural, of course, because we are very busy with our own spaces. But as a national system, we have to grease the interactions between the various players. And we've got a number of initiatives which I'll talk about to try and address these areas. There's something we call Education 5.0. And for those of us who are in another generation, we say 5.0. So somebody asked me, why are you not saying 5.0? Was it an O or a 0? It's just a little bit interesting to say 5.0, which adds innovation and industrialization to the 3 elements that we normally spend most of our efforts in, which is teaching, research, and community development. You see, the 5.0 really, the philosophy behind it is to try and transform the way education is presented in a system to generate better outcomes and be more action-oriented and less conceptual, all right? So by adding those 2 elements, we are hoping that then we find our way more and more to the market and striking a good balance between conceptual issues and the practical issues of society. It's about bringing education close to reality and getting it manifested in the planning, the design, the execution of the curriculums, and to promote intellectual infrastructure, encourage innovative attitudes, and respond to the demands of our society. It's being demonstrated in Kenyatta University. There is a demonstration, but definitely, as the Vice Chancellor said, there is room for improvement. So on behalf of government, then, I would say I will articulate a couple of things that we've set out, and we're rolling a number of them right now in a little while. To New Ulm University of Applied Sciences and DAD, it's to send appreciation for the partnership and collaboration, because being part of a global community in promoting the 5.0 education requires that you collaborate. And this partnership demonstrates now how Kenyatta University connects to the rest of the globe. And our prayer and desire is to strengthen these relationships. And as I also go out now, start engaging with as many partners as possible. The last 1 year has been heavily trying to lay a foundation in the agency. We've grown the number of staff. There were very few when I arrived. Probably we've grown them 300% in a year, which was quite a fast speed. And we've grown a number of partnerships as well. We've aligned very well with the government institutions. And now we're getting into a phase where we're beginning to strengthen partnerships and collaborations, which then help us scale the efforts that we have. I commend the founders and the startups for participating in the program. And I think the challenge is clear. You have demonstrated your initiative and courage. And the aspiration now is, how do we go beyond here? I also hope to spend a little bit of time and listen to some of the presentations. As I hear, my hope is that I hope the solutions really fit a need in society, because that's probably the foundation for scalability, and that the value proposition makes sense to a reasonable number of potential consumers who would feel that a pain point is being addressed, or some pain is being relieved, or some joy is being enhanced in which they can exchange by paying. The conference, of course, is focused on university industry, and this is a topic that somehow I have immersed myself over the last several months and reflected about the way we structure the relationships between these players. And I'm gradually becoming a great promoter of the same, because that's one way of trying to reduce the silo elements. And it is perceived, of course, as one of the mechanisms of enhancing innovation through that exchange that happens between the parties. So from Kenya's perspective, any opportunity we have to promote these relationships, we do it with all our might. And a classic example, Vice Chancellor, is that we are hosting this forum in this hotel and not in Kenyatta University. I learned something when I was in university as well, that some of the industry players don't come to the lecture room. We meet somewhere else. And that's okay. And that is how you break silos. You got to create the atmosphere. Environment does make a difference. The theme revolving around COVID-19, of course, we are tired. I know we are tired hearing COVID and Corona, because it's really, really put pressure on society. We've lost opportunities, we've lost livelihoods, a lot of pain, lives have been lost and so forth. But at least it has also taught something. It has taught us resilience, that if we pull together from the different backgrounds and contexts, and with sincere individual contribution and respect of our environment and our society, we can overcome quite a bit. And I hope that some of the solutions that we are dealing with here, of course, the program was never designed with COVID in mind, was it? When the program started, COVID wasn't really in mind, but at least it's giving us a point that, hey, some of the innovations we have, we can carve to the reality at the moment and solve some of the society challenges. Prof. Wainaina, you did mention a lot about the scaling issue. And as I've hinted around the mandate and the aspirations we have, it's a promise I want to make that we're prioritizing the question of scaling. And I think before I leave office, I really want to leave a mark that we did make a contribution to that, because I have had this over and over and over again about prototypes that just don't find their way into market. Of course, there are several factors that can contribute to that, but I do recognize the issue around funding and the issue around bottlenecks, because as you just mentioned, the example of a ventilator, I do know a set of bottlenecks in the system that then make it difficult to move. And I've candidly had conversations with a number of government agencies, sister government agencies, and we continue to sustain that momentum about how do we assist each other to then address some of these gaps that make it a bit slow. because it's true. Vice Chancellor, I also wouldn't want to come next year if we don't have some success stories to talk about. Because otherwise, then it looks like a hobby, some nice thing to do, like we just do it and then it feels nice and then we go home. And then we do another one, it's nice, we go home. I mean, I think we really do have to do everything at our own different levels on how to get to move to the next stage. So for several months that I've been in office, we've, besides growing our numbers and clarifying our mandate and so forth, and then managing the dynamics of growing numbers very rapidly and getting the right chemistry of the team that I'm working with, we have a couple of things that we've rolled out. The first one is the KeNIA Innovation Academy, because we realized that capacity is also an issue, and capacity ranges from leadership and strategy from an innovation perspective all the way to intellectual property, management and policy design and implementation of the same policies, all the way to attitudes, right? And so in the Innovation Academy, we are concentrating around capacity building across the entire country. Classic example is right now, I just came from Machakos, where we started on a workshop yesterday, about 30 or so individuals from government agencies, universities, and TVETs around effective IP policies. Now, the keyword to me is effectiveness. I can develop a document and put it on the website and tick that, yes, we've got an IP policy. But what about the effectiveness? And the issue you've just raised has a lot to do with the effectiveness of intellectual property management. And the challenge we are also posing is that as many institutions, including government agencies, got to build effective IP policies. Beyond the IP policies is the innovation strategies of our institutions. Because, Vice Chancellor, what you've just mentioned, you've actually given an indicator to Dr. Kosimbei, a measurable indicator. So, and I imagine in 5 years, Dr. Kosimbei translates that and said, I want to see 10 very scalable and successful startups in the market. If it becomes a strategic goal and we can list others within that innovation strategy, then the Vice Chancellor puts it in the institutional roadmap for the next 5 years and says, what do you need? You need partnerships, you need funding, you need the following. And all these things start tying together. The efforts in the institution start tying together. And we see why we do, so that we don't have small bits. There's an agency there, there's a policy document hanging there, there is some training happening here. But all that ties together through an innovation strategy. In the incubation, in the Innovation Academy, we've also designed a course on commercialization and technology transfer. And we've run one workshop. We've got a series of workshops coming up targeting specific innovation champions in institutions, so that then we diffuse this message and strategies and practices in institutions. Incubation management is also an issue that we are also realizing that we need to strengthen capacity on, the way we run our incubators and incubation programs. Sometimes it's not necessarily very well standardized and best practiced. Another course we've designed, which it's going to be very experiential, is what we call R2C. So we designed it a few months ago. R2C is research to commercialization. You see, the discipline and the rules of the game of conducting research are different from the rules and the game of building an enterprise. They're different. And sometimes we probably don't need the person who did the research. Sometimes, all right? And we've got to appreciate that. You can't hold it for too long if I can't scale it. All right. And there's a player out there who probably might be very good in doing so. And what we want to do through this program is to take a group of researchers who've produced prototypes and take them through R2C program for a couple of months. Those are examples. Some of the outputs we are also working on, and I actually want to pick up from Professor, the DVC, is around commercialization guidelines. You did mention something to do with as many institutions as possible. Because at national level, we haven't kind of framed very well what is our roadmap around commercialization and how do we ensure institutions have some kind of standardized way of going about it. And so we're putting together those guidelines. We are also working on a national innovation report that is supposed to demonstrate our progress we are making on an annual basis. We're also working on a framework for incubation coordination across the country, so that we have a iBird's view of what happens and how our practices are going. We're also designing what we're calling an innovation bridge, because part of that scaling problem is because maybe you as a startup, you haven't connected to a partner who could help you make it work. Partnership, and I need to link you. And I remember my great-grandmother used to go to the market and she would take her vegetables and she would tell me, if I don't go to the market, I won't sell. A simple analogy is that if I grew the produce, but if I don't take it to market, I won't convert it. So there's something called a market. And the market needs to be understood very well by the buyer and the seller. And we need to cultivate that market. It has facilities. It has a place where you go and sit and, and it has a protocol of how you operate there. And that market is something we want to build, starting off with what we're calling a digital marketplace. Because every time I go to functions and I meet someone who tells me, I like what you said. There is another innovation I saw in Taita Taveta. You need to go and see it. And then when I get to Taita Taveta, I meet another guy and say, there's one I saw in Kisumu. You need to see that thing. Now, I can't also go everywhere. But if we got a marketplace of some sort that takes care of interests of the various stakeholders, then we start creating connections. We're also designing the KeNIA Innovation Week, which a number of us have talked about, between the 6th and the 10th of December. And I want to explain a little bit about the philosophy of this idea. It's a movement. It's not an event. It's a movement. And when it's a movement, because then we're using it as a way of reflecting on what we've achieved over the last 12 months, and then propel ourselves with very specific measurable things that we're going to work over the next 10, 12 months. We celebrate, we energize the innovation ecosystem, we showcase success stories, and they really got to be success stories. We share experiences of what works and what doesn't work. We cultivate the spirit of innovation. We hope to achieve it over the next several years on an annual basis, and we've started attracting quite a number of partners, both locally and internationally, and it's quite encouraging. And I hope that this will gradually become a platform that brings the whole world to Kenya at a particular time in the year, not just to be known only for our sports. I know we run very well, that's beautiful, but there's something about the innovativeness of Kenyans, and that will be the platform. As a build-up to it, of course, we have a number of pre-events. This is a classic example. Dr. Kosimbeya, I agree with you, is we are energizing the momentum and then we climax. And then we say, so where are we going from here? In very, very specific and tangible ways. We have 4 tracks that we are looking at: skills and talent, number 1. 2 is technology, and 4th, industrial evolution issues. 3 is commercialization, and 4 is startups. We've also designed innovation awards. I got to office, I found only 1 type of innovation award, and we've designed 10 of them. And they range from organizations, individuals, partners, and so on and so forth, county governments. We're going to run 3 for this financial year, and then we'll open up others. So there's a call that is already up for startups that are addressing issues on Big 4 agenda, and then you're invited to apply. And there's going to be some funding around it that hopefully supports you to move to another level. We're also going to support assistive technologies as well as government agencies that are championing innovation, because institutions have to do it. In a workshop we were having yesterday on effective IP policies, the debate was very hot around what is the individual's role and what is the institutional role in creating an appropriate environment, and how do we hold each other accountable. We are also going to start an innovation fellowship, and this is more going to be next year, but it's going to revolve around a multidisciplinary approach of identifying talent that can be pulled together to solve very specific societal challenges or challenges in government, parastatals, and so on and so forth. So you put a team together, 4 or 5 people, and they tackle a challenge for about 6 months to 1 year and hopefully create a great solution out of it. So from KeNIA is my commitment and my promise that given the role that I have to lead the team, our desires is to strengthen the quality of our spaces and build value-based dialogues between entrepreneurs, academia, industry, and hopefully generate as many ideas in the market as possible. Honestly speaking, I have seen a lot of prototypes. This is examples, but I've seen lots and lots of them. And we have an opportunity to move to the next level. We're seeking feedback, we're seeking input, and any opportunity you have to engage with us, please. We want to learn as much as we can. We are tackling something we don't have all the experience in, and we're seeking as many ideas and feedback as possible. I want to leave you with 3 parting shots. Number 1 is our definition of innovation. We simply say it's change that adds value. That's our simple definition of innovation. It's change that adds value. That gives everyone a chance to realize that you can be innovative. You don't have to produce a rocket, but you can change the processes in your own organization. That's innovation. It's change that adds value. All right. So it's not to think that this is a scientific thing only for computer scientists and engineers. It is for society. Anyone is innovative. It's just that the type of innovation, the extent of innovation, and the context of innovation will vary. Second point is there's a gentleman called William Brody, who is a scientist, who said, what is the calculus of innovation? And he answered it by saying the calculus of innovation is really quite simple. Knowledge drives innovation. Innovation drives productivity. Productivity drives the economy. And that speaks to the message of the Vice Chancellor that fine, we've got the knowledge and we've created prototypes. And the challenge to all of us is, how does that drive productivity? And how is that going to drive the economic growth? Vision 2030, Big Four agenda, all that in a nutshell is about better socioeconomic life of people, bottom line. And how is our efforts going to translate to that? My third parting shot would be by Stephen Johnson, who said, if you look at history, innovation doesn't come from giving people incentives. It comes from creating environments where their ideas can connect. And I think our institutions are going to gravitate more and more as we push the narrative of 5.0, making our institutions as an environment that make ideas collude and grow into something greater. And as KeNIA, it's something we have to do, grease the mechanisms that enable institutions and individuals and partners to interact for ideas to connect and grow. It's my promise to you that we'll do our best, and let's do our individual best. Thank you.